So, welcome everybody to this diverse seminar. I'm Jeremy Cohen from Imperial College London. I'm going to give you a little brief introduction to the Diverse series and then introduce our speakers for today. So please bear with me for a minute while I just run through a brief intro. The first thing I want to highlight is our code of conduct. You can find the code of conduct on the URL that's listed there. But I guess many of you will be familiar with codes of conduct for such events. I do encourage you to go and take a look nonetheless. But I just want to highlight that and point out that all of the discussion and communication and whatever in relation to this event falls under that diverse code of conduct. So thank you for adhering to that. Diverse series, for those of you who haven't been to any of our previous talks, this was something which started as a result of a workshop that took place in the Netherlands back in April 2022. And that was an invite-only workshop. And I think all of the people present there were very much aware that there were lots of really important discussions that took place that we felt were really very, very much things that we'd like to take to a wider audience and engage with the wider community with. So that was really where the Diverse series started from. As a result of that, we've tried to keep things going over the last couple of years. We've had quite a long break since the last talk, but we're hoping to keep things going again over the next few months, and we have some more speakers lined up. So we encourage you to feel free to go back and look at the previous talks. There are some videos from some of the previous sessions if you'd like to see what was covered previously, and do look out for details of more talks that are coming up over the coming months. So with that, I'm really, really pleased to welcome our speakers for today, Kaye and Malvika Sharan. Thank you to both of you for agreeing to run this session. And they're going to be talking about equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in the RSE community. And I think this is something that we might say is a bit of an experimental format. So there's going to be a discussion on reflections on successes and challenges that Ella and Malvika will be talking to each other about, and it'll be really interesting to see how this goes. And I know there'll be lots of opportunity for discussion and engagement as we move through the session. So with that, I'm going to unshare my screen, and I'm going to invite Ella and Malvika to kick off. So.
There we go. As Jeremy said, this is a bit of an experimental format. What we're going to do is just Malvika and I are going to briefly introduce ourselves and share a few questions or themes for discussion that we're hoping to cover in some way over a discussion that Malvika and I will have, that we'll probably chat with each other for maybe 20 to about 30 minutes, maybe 25 minutes, and then open up the room for further discussion. And I'm sure everyone here has experiences that will be relevant to the conversation, and it will be really great to hear those too. So by way of introduction, we'll do introductions, then we'll have a conversation, then the Q&A. Malvika, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am Malvika Sharan. I identify myself as a researcher, a community facilitator. I think my word next to community has changed a lot. Sometimes I called myself community managers, community builders. I think facilitator is where I kind of sit right now. I'm a senior researcher at the Alan Turing Institute in London. I am a lead of a research community management team where we are building on research software engineering movement and trying to professionalize community management in research software context or data science in general. I'm also a co-lead for the Turing Way, which is a community very much driven by community interest. We are building data science practices and sharing them. And when I say building, it's basically centralizing. We value all the work that has happened so far in different communities, and we have this platform where we can give spotlight to them. But beyond that particular book, we are a community of advocates who want the culture change in data science. We want inclusive, collaborative, and reproducible research to become a norm. I'm also a co-founder for OLS. Formerly Open Life Science. We kind of stopped using Open Life Science because we have a lot of members. Most members are not life scientists, where originally the community started from. It's a training and mentoring program in open science, open source practices, where people bring different projects. We take them through trainings in open science practices, as well as community building practice. So a lot of people who have come through Open Life Science, OLS, have launched their own communities. I'm really well embedded in open source and open science communities. I am, as I said, building on the RSE movement, which is my connection with RSE. I have to also kind of tell you a bit of my positionality. Maybe Ella, next slide.
Yeah.
So I am a person from India. I grew up in a very small town called Jharkhand, and I always have to put that with caveat that this town is 1 million people, so not very small for European standards. But it is quite small. It is largely indigenous population, very multicultural, multi-religious, and also it has a long-standing history of tribal struggle and representation and statehood. And all of these I witnessed, but when I was witnessing, I really did not see that as a thing that is unique. I just saw it as a thing that I grew up with. I moved from north of India, where I was born and raised, and went to south of India, where the language wasn't what I was using. So that's where I learned how to speak English. I knew English as a language, but it wasn't my spoken language. Later, I moved to Germany for my master's and PhD. And those are the places where I kind of started to reconcile my identity as a person who grew up in India with the person who lives in Europe. Situating my own experience in the contrast of new privileges that I gained as part of my life in Europe. And it profoundly influenced my personal longing for community and communities that I grew up with, communities that I felt at home with. To be in a country where you don't speak the language, don't feel embedded. Although I do have to confess, now I have a German passport, so it's a different kind of intersectional lens to that. So I have been really strongly building and drawing from my own upbringing as a community builder. And after my PhD, that has become my profession. But often community management is feminized in a way. Any care infrastructure, care work is feminized. And a lot of people in traditional academic system would often receive my advocacy for community building with skepticism and dismissal. But I'm also, as I said, have gained a lot of privilege. I am a cisgender woman. I'm in a heterosexual relationship. I have a financial stability. I live in London. I have access to privileged group. I get invited to be in conversation. And although in the beginning, in those conversations, I would not have felt very at home with, I would have seen myself as an imposter who thought that she didn't belong. Now I take that space as my duty to speak up and represent all of these work that my community and I are doing, and to voice EDIA concerns in places where they might not be normally spoken about. So I'm going to pass it to Ella.
Thank you, Malvika. Hi, I'm Ella. I'm a research software engineer at the University of Warwick. I work with Heather Turner, who I see is here today. Hi, Heather. On her fellowship project, Sustainability and EDI in the R project. And what that work entails is there are many strands to it, but always with the goal of fostering a larger and more diverse community of contributors to base R. So that's one of the positions that I'll be talking from today is working as part of my job to improve EDIA in the R project. But there are other communities that I'm involved with as well that are relevant to this conversation. So I am the co-founder and co-organizer of a community called Rainbow R, which is a community that exists to connect, support, and promote LGBTQ+ people who code in the R language, and to spread awareness of LGBTQ+ issues through data-driven activism. So I've got that experience to speak of, and also another thing that I've done recently relevant to today's conversation is I was a research partner in the SSI Inclusive Project, which was run by Anita Banerjee, who I see Anita is on the call today. Hi, Anita. So that was a project that is a multi-phase project looking at improving inclusivity within the RSE world. And again, that's something I can be speaking of more as we continue this conversation. So in terms of my positionality, the ways in which I am underrepresented in RSE or hold minority positions is that I'm female and I am also gay. And we know that women are underrepresented within RSE, even relative to other positions in academia. Being gay, I don't know if that's underrepresented in RSE or not. There's just like that research isn't out there, but I think being gay has been a marginalized position for sure. But more than feeling underrepresented, I am extremely aware of my privilege. I'm white, I'm cisgendered, from the global north. I have a degree of financial stability, and I've had what I think is usually described as an elite education. But it's my experience, both in the ways that I've been underrepresented and overprivileged, that have driven my interest in EDIA issues. From the underrepresented side of things, I've come to really value the role of community and the importance of supporting each other in minority positions. And from the overrepresented position, I want to be able to use my privilege to bring about some of the change which I think we need. So Malvika and I are going to have a conversation today that's broadly going to raise kind of 6 questions or themes. I'm going to pop them up on the slides, then I'm going to post them on the chat, and then I'm going to close. Then I'm going to show some resources, but then I'm going to close the slides because I think for the conversation as a whole, it will be nicer not to have a screen dominated by slides. So what have been our experiences in RSE or research as members of underrepresented or overrepresented communities? What challenges have we faced when pushing for more EDIA in the RSE community? We'll speak on the importance and difficulties of community building and why it matters from an EDIA perspective. We'll talk about intersectionality between developing an RSE identity and identities of members of groups that are underrepresented in the broader RSE community. We'll talk about links between EDIA and justice, and because we always want to end on a positive note, some positive examples of groups and initiatives where EDIA was improved. So those are our questions and themes. But before we get to the main part of the conversation, I'm going to share a few resources that we can come back to. So as I mentioned, I'm run Rainbow R, so we've got a list there. Malvika runs Turing Way, that's there, and OLS, which you also spoke about. Malvika has also put together started up what you say about the resource list and share the link.
Yeah, so as usual, we generally put together a shared document for any event we have, because we know that there are people in the audience who may have a lot more experience than the speakers in the room. We want to hear from you. So please do use this to let us know that you're here, and you can take notes. The notes generally doesn't expire for 365 days, but you can also always come back or archive it for yourself. At the end of this document, we will be also sharing some resources. I've already shared some resources that I kind of read through or was thinking about their relevance to this conversation. So if you have some relevant resources that you would like each other to know, including us, please do share that with us too.
All right, I'll stop my share and Malvika and I will chat.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually start by saying that I met Ella through a conference that Ella was organizing, and she invited me to be part of a panel on ETI. And post-panel, we plan to give a summary of that panel in this fall several months ago. But of course, life happens, and it happened, and we had to take some break. And then we came back saying, well, new month, we're going to just now chat with each other because we hadn't caught up. And also we have, as individuals, grown in the last year. And the projects that Ella talked about, some of them are very recent, which are very, very relevant. And some of those conversations that we started to have, we kind of started to connect the identity, the relevance of identity in community building, and why they matter and why it's important to bring those identity as a whole to advocate for EDIA. So Ella, do you want to tell us a bit about your own community experiences?
Sure. So one thing that's been an absolute game changer for me is the job that I have. And I think I grew up in the age of Section 28, where people, you weren't even allowed to talk about being gay at school, and big concerns about whether being open about being gay was going to be a hindrance for me in any career. And I've seen, in fact, certainly for the job that I have now, exactly the opposite. And I know I'm extremely lucky and again privileged in this position, but for my work around building community about R and EDIA in the R community, I'd say that being gay, running Rainbow R was actually a massive bonus. But for that to be a bonus for finding this job, key to that is having a boss, having a role where that work is valued. And again, as somebody who's generally underrepresented, to have such a supportive boss in such a supportive role, that's made all the difference for me. So I think my experience of being underrepresented from an underrepresented community has, for me, been a huge positive. But I know that won't be the case for everybody. What about for you, Malvika?
Yeah, I have a background in bioinformatics, and I do not work in bioinformatics, not because I didn't like the field. I really love the field, but I really recognized how much I loved community building. And definitely my initial community building work was in the bioinformatics, but I always felt that we were working in very privileged locations where people already had access to infrastructure and resources. And so I was in European molecular biology laboratory, intergovernmental, really wonderful work culture, and people were amazing. But the more we worked there, the more we realized that people in here have access to everything. We should be working more with communities. And at the time, we were working closely with the carpentries, where through Train the Trainer, we were building, like expanding this community where people can teach each other how to code. And that community actually was my entry point to open source, open science contribution, where every kind of contribution was valued. Like you can make a typo correction on a repository where training material was amazing. I got an email from the person who actually founded the carpentries, and he was my trainer in 2015, saying that you should go and teach in Berlin. And I was a graduate student. I had never thought about that I have anything to offer. But like having those kind of encouragement from people who see that you can do something that you didn't think you could makes you quite empowered. And a lot of time, those kind of nudges don't come from your general job. That comes from a community that you might be part of, where you can experiment with skills and positions and roles that you may not otherwise have opportunity to do. So I think I gravitated to those communities that were actually trying very hard to be global and trying very hard to create spaces for marginalized communities to gain access to knowledge and infrastructure that they wouldn't generally have. And I have self-selected consciously or unconsciously those communities that have very strong code of conduct, very strong community participation guideline, very strong community calls and onboarding calls where you do have multiple chances to get to know the community. And then I have to say, like, in the other part of this question is that overrepresented communities and places where I don't feel that I have enough opportunity to speak up or be heard, or that I don't see anybody like me, might be the community that I don't end up being part of. And maybe it's a loss for me because they're having a conversation that would have been great for my career, but I just didn't think that I belong there. So yeah, I think it's quite interesting, but also like having those experiences have shaped what I do and don't want to do in my community. When I do inform the community infrastructure, community guidance, I do have to say, like, because Anilda is on the call, I know Anilda for several years. And when we were doing code of conduct development in the carpentries, we were trying to like think about what does code of conduct looks like in like global context. Can we take this code of conduct and put it in African context or Asian context? And Anilda was like, no, you cannot. And I was too naive back then. I'm like, yes, you can. You totally can. And then 2 years later, I told Anilda, you were so right. I should be taking into account contextual experience of people and culture of people. And all of these learnings I would never get otherwise. Like if I wasn't working in these places where people were diverse and people were willing to teach you, people were willing to tell you that you're wrong, and they give you time to reflect and grow up. But we'll talk about like some of the errors and mistakes too. But yeah, I have to like say that these experiences have been so monumental in shaping my own understanding.
Sure, you know, it so much changes over time as well, and in terms of the kind of communities that we're part of, and as we grow and learn, and you know, we've talked previously, and I think we'll talk on this call about some of the mistakes that we've made in the past, but as we grow and learn from them, not only do we have an opportunity to grow, but we have an opportunity to take that back to the communities that we're part of as well. And also there's a personal growth as well. I think as I get older, as I'm increasingly confident in my own skin, that affects how much I'm willing to bring of my personal side to my work. So that makes a difference to the kind of communities and the kind of jobs, the kind of communities I want to be part of, and the kind of work that I want to do. So none of this is static, and I'm sure will continue to change as I continue to grow and as new opportunities become available.
I think you and I have this conversation already, but I thought that would be relevant to bring exactly on the note that you said, the more we become experienced, the more we become comfortable to be the person who speaks differently or talks about different concerns or different topics that are not generally being talked about or challenged. I think when people are younger and they don't have that psychological safety, it's very hard to expect them to advocate for something that is generally not happening. So I think maybe it's just me, and I don't want to project my personal experience on others, and I'm very keen to hear what people think. But the more years I have been in these kind of communities, the more comfortable I have become in advocating for EDIA concerns. And also it comes from trusting that there are other people who I know will agree with me and they know that this is relevant for them. So maybe that is the psychological safety I have. Or maybe this privilege of being in those places so much that you feel like you belong and therefore you deserve to be heard. I was listening to something where which really resonated with me about reconciling our identities. So like I work at the Alan Turing Institute. I have multiple projects within the institute. For example, I talked about research committee management team that we are building, but then I'm also part of a project called Practitioners Hub. We're working with companies and the companies have different needs. And then I have the Turing Way, and the Turing Way is very grassroots. And don't quote me, but it's being recorded, so I'm quoted. It's a kind of like hippie sort of culture. Like people are very activist, people are very willing to share their experience, people are there fully themselves. And I feel like my identity doesn't need to be masked. I can be a person of color, I can be a woman, I can be a person from Global South, I can be a person with privilege in European country, and all of those matter. And those are being shaped constantly by the conversation people are having. And I learn so much from these people. And Anilda mentioned Batul. Every now and then Batul have these calls. And I learn so much just by talking to Batul because she brings different kind of experiences. But we do struggle to find these kind of spaces where you can be fully you with your fully all intersectional identity in one place, because your priorities may be at odds with what your organization wants. And sometimes your business model and business priority do not align with what you as an individual want to do. So I think that's also why I gravitate so strongly towards some open source, open science communities where those identities actually start to matter because people are trying to bring that into the product or project they're building. So yeah, tell me a bit about that from your perspective, running Rainbow R and SSI Inclusive.
Well, I think the intersectionality thing is so interesting because running Rainbow R is something that I was doing prior to the job that I have now, but I've been able to fold some of that into the job. And I think that has had two effects, one of which is it makes such a difference knowing that work is valued and to an extent financially valued because it's part of my job, therefore I'm getting paid a bit to do it. But that other people think that this is important, and I think it gives some status as well to the community. I think so that's really important, and I think being able to do it as part of my job makes it seem more important. I mean, I know that it's important even if it's not part of my job, but sometimes it can feel really hard to justify spending a lot of time on something when there are so many competing pressures, both professional and personal pressures. So having it valued in that way and brought into the working hours makes a huge difference. But also on the intersectionality front, and in terms of sort of like how I have been developing my RSE identity as a member of an underrepresented group, that suddenly being gay has not only become something that obviously is important to me personally, but it has very much been brought to the forefront of my job. And it's taken a couple of years for me to really lean into that and to promote Rainbow R heavily as part of my work, to make that like part of my bio now in a professional setting. If you told me 20 years ago that I'd be like broadly like telling the world that I was gay and celebrating that as part of my work, and that being a positive thing, I wouldn't have believed you, but here we are. So yeah, it's become a huge part of both my personal and my professional identity.
What is SSI Inclusive Project about?
Oh, so this is fantastic. So from the Software Sustainability Institute, and I'm hoping that when we get to a more open chat that Anita can weigh in here too, because she's the one who's running the project. But it's a 3-phase project. In the first phase, a team from the SSI and the University of Manchester came together to think about what kind of work they needed to do or needed to be done in order to increase inclusivity in the RSE community. And they knew that part of what they needed to do was to talk to members of underrepresented groups and to bring in that lived experience. And so in phase 2, they took applications from people who were both RSEs or in RSE-like roles, because I think there's an interesting conversation to be had as well as to what constitutes an RSE identity. Does one need to be employed with an RSE job title, or how does that all fit together? So they put out a call for applicants who are RSEs, but also members of underrepresented communities. And there were two of us at that point who joined the team, and we were able to bring our experience, both members of these communities, as both RSEs, but also of members of underrepresented communities, to work with the Manchester team to develop research methodology. So in this phase, in phase 2, we weren't actually going out and doing the research, but we were developing the research methodologies that we could take to take forward in phase 3, which is upcoming. And so, for example, as part of that, I was working with the team and to generate an interview schedule to answer the research question of what are the enablers and barriers to adopting an RSE identity as either a woman or an LGBTQ plus some person.
It's very interesting. Yeah, it does bring us to the intersectionality between developing RSE identity and identities as members of underrepresented group. As I was saying, I don't identify myself as RSE, but I do call myself RSE adjacent, because a lot of work that we do are in complementarity with what RSE do. So research community management, as I said, building on RSE movement and professionalizing community management in research software setting or data science setting, or research in general, because all research are data science these days. And a lot of work that we do, it kind of wants to reinforce RSE work on reproducible tool development and developing sustainable infrastructure and not reinventing the wheel and supporting open source adoption, which is what community manager and my team are also trained to do. Like, they need to be supporting open source reproducibility in the community context, not just in where software is being developed. And I had very interesting kind of conversations in the last few months where we were talking about this concept of open source program office, which is something that's coming from American context or like private industry, where companies would have open source program office, where this program office would have, depending on how big the company is, 1 to 12 or 20 people or even larger, who would help the company adopt open source or get their software engineers to contribute to an open source that the company needs. And this concept has come out of the industries and have gone into public sector, government, and universities, and it's slowly coming to Europe as well. And Neil Chuhong from SSI and I were like, well, if we can put a research software engineer and community manager together, they're actually really powerful open source program office because that's what they do. So do we really need us to go and chase another new concept, or can we really empower these groups because that's the work we've been doing for so long? So there's also this idea that these roles are so dynamic. They adopt to new technology. They are actually trained to do that. They are passionate about it. They are driven by the exact idea of how can we make things efficient for each other. And that makes it quite unique. And I think this is also inspiring other roles to become more professionalized beyond research committee management. We have a team called Research Application Management that's run by Ida Mehonech, which is right now at the Turing, but we do want to kind of explain this is a product management equivalent in research setting, which is again in complementarity with research software engineers. How can we take the product that they develop, make it usable in the real world context? So how do we not expect now research software engineer to become unicorn is what we are trying to do. Can we take over some of the work that you're expected to do, but you should not be because you're already doing a lot of work. And I think from that perspective, I do really strongly support RSE work because that work is really paving way for so many of these new roles to come up and work around them and build a STEAM science mindset in which we can work. My colleague Emma Karun has been working on a research which is being released very soon around what these roles look like. So I would say my work really depend on RSE community. So my identity is somewhat attached to that.
I've never heard anyone describe themselves as RSE adjacent before. And I think that one of the things that is so exciting about working in the open science space is the way people with various different roles come together. And I think that for me, this was particularly exemplified this year. I attended my first collaborations workshop. For those unfamiliar, they're again run by the Software Sustainability Institute, but it's brings together anyone with an interest in open science to be it RSEs, policymakers, librarians, data science, a whole scope to come together to talk, to discuss, but also to generate ideas and build on them. So that was just such an enthralling and positive experience to be part of that, but also to see it, going back to your point about how people with different roles are working together to support each other and to draw on different people's skills and expertise to come together to make things that are bigger than what any one individual or any one role can accomplish.
Should we move to the tough point around EDIA and justice?
Yes. Do you want to kick us off on that?
Oh my God. This is a hard one because this is not my area of expertise. And I have scribbled a lot of what I wanted to talk about. And I think what I kind of found the sentence on who are we when we say we are a community and how are we constituting that we really is an identity related work. And it really centers or builds the identity of the community beyond the individuals, but also makes us question whose interests are being prioritized in this space and how does that serve that community, whose interests are advocated for. And that to me is a lot about cognitive justice and the justice for people, their rights to do research or rights to be part of a conversation in building technology that affects them. And also, I think it's hard to not talk about AI and fairness and bias in this world. And all of them are very strongly tied to whose interests are being advocated for here. Who is this technology serving? Who is being marginalized? Who is being exploited or harmed? We also talk a lot about climate justice, where this all comes back to who is going to be most affected are the people who are indigenous community, whose ecosystem is completely in danger because we are not seeing those. So I think it's really, really important that maybe I want to tie it back to things that I'm thinking very strongly these days, is that why don't we center public engagement and working with community stakeholder in the center of technology development? And when, even though, as I said, justice is not my area of expertise, but I am, as an individual working in research, responsible to be taking accountability for what the work that I'm doing is going to affect the community. So yeah, I think it's probably to say that if I want to advocate for diverse opinions, I need to create spaces where diverse opinion can be advocated. If I am limited and I cannot advocate for diverse opinion, I need to be honest and transparent about whose interests are not being addressed here and what am I doing to mitigate that, or who am I collaborating with who are addressing this already, because it's also about not trying to do everything in the same place, but building connection with right communities and right projects who are addressing things that we are not addressing. I think we need to do collaborative research a lot more if we want to be fair in the work.
I want to broaden this conversation out to the floor, but we did say we were going to end with positive examples, and I wondered if you wanted to wrap up, or for both of us just to wrap up this part of the session with something you've been really proud of in your work.
I'm going to share something that I shared with my team this morning. One of my team members brought like a challenge. We do a challenge clinic every month. And someone brought a challenge saying that, oh, I get told to do too many things that I should not be doing. And someone said, but we are doer by nature, so we need to learn how to say no. And I found this really nice resource, which I'm putting in the chat, which is called Dark Side of Community Management. How to identify where we as community managers make our virtue our vice, and how to say no, and how to actually celebrate our own work. So that would be my joyful thing to share.
Oh, fantastic. I look forward to following up on that. I think for me, I'm going to keep on harping on about Rainbow Art because that's the thing that I'm really proud of at the moment. But I think that was exemplified for me recently at the Use Art conference, which is a big conference. There were over 600 people there, but we really worked hard to bring together the LGBTQ plus folk within that community. We had a big Rainbow Art presence there, and got feedback from people afterwards that had been their highlight of the conference, that it can be really easy to get lost at a big conference, but finding that small community within a bigger community was really valuable for people, and there were some really great connections made there. So that's going to be the thing I'm going to share as my positive example. But on that, I really want to open it up to the floor.
At this point, we'll stop recording.